Welcome to Horror TV. This is your host, Killenberg. For this episode, I'm going to be reviewing episode 4 of Bates Motel, which is titled Trust Me. So the episode starts with the recap from the previous episodes. We see a man in a motorcycle, which turns out to be Dylan. He sees Norman walking by the motel. We see Norman go to Shelby's house and he gets off the motorcycle to go looking for Norman. We see Norman going to the basement. Shelby shows up and Dylan hides. Shelby hears his dog bark and says he's coming. He goes in the house. They reuse the scene of him finding the woman. Norman finding the woman. And of course, Shelby looks around the house. Norman hears Shelby and gets scared. Shelby frees his dog, but hears a doorbell. It's Dylan. Dylan says his bike is out of gas, and he was asking if there was any gas station nearby. Norman tries to go out the window, but the woman grabs his leg. Shelby tells Dylan he's off duty, but says there's a shell 2 miles away. Norman tells her he'll come back and goes out the window. Dylan looks around outside. He sees Norman run away. We see the opening. Dylan runs to the house. Dylan asks Norman what he was doing at that cop's house. Norman says he wasn't at a cop's house. He was out running. Dylan says he saw him. He asks him who he thinks knocked on the door. Dylan asks what kind of trouble he's in. Norman says he's not in trouble. Dylan says he's not going to tell Norma. We see Norman walking to a house. He knocks. A man answers. He tells him he's a friend of Emma's and said he thought they could walk to school. The man says, "You're Norman Bates?" He says he's heard a lot about him. He says Norma has a flu and she won't be in school for at least a week. Her dad tells him that Emma has a crush on him and says he seems like a nice kid. He tells him to be decent. Norman says he is decent. We see Norma go to Shelby's car. He starts touching her legs. She asks where they're going. He says the motel. She says Norman won't be home until 4:30. He says that gives them an hour and they kiss. We see them making out and undressing in a room. We see them lying in bed together. She tells him he's pretty. Norman walks out of the room. Dylan is in a chair. He says, "Hello there, Norma." Then Shelby walks out. She introduces them. Shelby watches him as he goes in his vehicle. We see Norman washing a window. He sees Bradley and goes up to her. She's putting one of those crosses where her dad crashed. So we now know her dad died. We see that she's wearing sunglasses. She says, "Hey, Norman," and is clearly upset. He says he's so sorry and she cries. We see Dylan in the kitchen. Norma walks in and asks what he's doing. He says he bought some groceries. He says he thought he should contribute since he'll be living there for a while. He tells her she's a piece of work. He asks how long she's been seeing that cop. She says she doesn't think that's any of his business. He says he thinks it is. He says he would be careful. She asks what about. He says he doesn't trust him, and she walks out. We see Norman walking with some movies. He sees police at a lobster restaurant. He put his hood up. Shelby says Norman, but he continues walking. Shelby follows him. Shelby says freeze and scares Norman. He starts laughing. He asks what he's doing. Norman says taking a shortcut home and picking up some movies for Bradley. Shelby says death is profound. Norman says he guesses so. Shelby tells him he's sensitive. He says he really likes Norman. He suggests them to get to know each other. He offers to take him fishing. He says he has a secret spot with lots of fish. He asks if he likes that plan. Norman says yes, but you can clearly tell he doesn't. He tells him not to run away next time he says hi on the street. We see Norma reading something about the city council on her laptop. Norman walks in and tells her about the girl in the basement. He also tells her about the book and other things. She asks why he would go into Shelby's house. He says to find the bell and says she told him to. She says she never told him that. He says yes, you did. She hugs him. She tells him sometimes he hears and sees things that aren't there. She says he's done that for a while. She says she'll protect him. At Shelby's house, we see Norma in bed with Shelby. She gets out of bed and gets dressed. She looks in the basement. She goes in the room where the woman was at. Shelby walks up behind her. He asks her what she's doing. She says she can't sleep. We see Norman putting socks on. He has blood on his leg. Norman walks into the living room. Norma was on the couch. He asks her where she was last night. She says she made an extra turkey pot pie and brought it to Shelby's. She tells him he's jealous and not used to her being happy with someone else. He tells her she's his mother, not his girlfriend. She says it's not what she meant. She tries to defend him. Norman says he has a girl in his basement. She says no he doesn't and says she went looking for it last night. She says he's acting crazy. He says he's not crazy and showed Norma the blood. She tells him it'll be okay. He yells it's not okay. She says yes it is. She says Zack is coming at 10 and you're going fishing with him. End of conversation. And she tells him to get ready. We see them fishing together. Shelby asks how his relationship with his dad is. He says Norma told him he was a little abusive. Norman says he had his moments. Shelby asks if he ever hurt him. He says no. Shelby tells him he's going to be in his life and he wants to be in his life because he's putting himself on the line to protect Norma. In doing that, he's protecting him. He says he needs to know that he can trust Norman. He says he needs him to trust him. He asks if he can do that. Norman says, yes, I can trust you. Shelby says that's good. Shelby gets a call. He says he'll be right there. He says something came up. We see Shelby go to a boat. Alex Romero is there. He says it's Keith. He says this is his watch, his ugly watch. Shelby says that's it. We see his hand in a bucket. We see Norman walking on the stairs. Norman gets a text from Bradley. She asks if he can get some ice cream. He smiles and goes the other way. We see them at a restaurant. Bradley is still wearing sunglasses. She tells him he's one of the few people she can stand to be around. She says he seems to get it. He says he's flattered that she can stand to be with him. She says she'll never get to see her dad again. She says it's a really bad plan, whoever came up with it. Norman explains that he thinks it takes your body some time to accept someone is gone. She says she really likes being with him. She says she wonders whose hand they found. He asks if they knew whose hand it was. She says no, just some man's hand. He goes to the house and yells, "Mother." She says what? He tells her about the hand. She says it's just a hand. It could be a million different hands. The doorbell rings. It's Shelby. He says they need her to come down to the station and says Sheriff Romero wants to ask her some questions. Now at the police station, we see Norma in a chair, spinning keys around. Alex sits in his desk. He asks her to tell him what happened. She says she was at home and the police said they wanted to talk to her. He says he means what happened the night Keith Summers went missing. She says she told him everything she knows. He says they found microfibers and are going to match them with the carpets of the motel. She says have fun doing that. He says he's trying to help her. He says he knows she did it. She asks how he could know that. He says he's been doing it for 20 years. He says Keith wasn't always a nice guy. He asks where she dumped the carpet. She asks how they could test if they can't find it. He says it'll only go to 3 different places, but it'd be easier if she told them where it was at. She says she doesn't remember. We see Norman driving. Norman says the carpets won't still be in the dumpster. She says they might be. He says it won't be there because it was the first night they moved there. She says fine then, it won't be there. He says whatever. She asks what got into him. She asks if it's Dylan doing. They go to the dumpster. Norman was right. She calls someone. She asks where the trash is taken. They go to where it's taken. It's locked. He tells her she has every right to defend herself. She says she didn't defend herself. She says she killed the crap out of him. She says she doesn't know why she did it. She was just angry. She says he doesn't understand and says her whole life she had to put up with this. We hear Norma cry. The camera goes to Norman. He's sitting in bed. He gets up. Norman goes to Dylan. They say hey to each other. Dylan asks why he always runs away. Norman says he don't. Dylan offers him a drink. Norman drinks some. He starts coughing. Dylan says he's sorry and says Norma's crazy. Norman says he has no idea and is clearly upset. He sits next to Dylan. Norman tells him what happened. He says he's scared. Dylan says he's going to help him get that woman out. Bradley texts Norman and says, hey. Dylan asks if she's pretty. Dylan tells him to text her and say he's coming over. Norman texts her. When she texted back, Dylan picked up the phone. He says she said cool, everyone's asleep at my house. Please come over. He says he can't go now and says it's crazy. Dylan tells him this is the only thing not crazy. He tells him to be a 17-year-old for 5 minutes. He leaves. Norman reads the messages. Bradley opens the door. He goes in. She asks if he wants to go to her room. He asks where her mom is at. She says sedated. They go in her room. They sit on the bed. She says thank you for helping me so much. She says she's tired of being sad. She asks if he thinks she's weird. He says he doesn't. She says thank you. He says it's his pleasure. They make out and other stuff. Back to the house, we see Norma in bed. She wakes up and looks at her watch. She gets up. She goes to Norman's room. He's not there. She asks Dylan where Norman's at. Dylan says out with a girl. She asks what girl. Dylan says he hopes he's getting laid because he sure the hell deserves it for having to put up with her crazy ass. Norma says, how dare you? She asks what he knows about anything between her and Norman. He says he knows all he needs to know. She asks what Norman said. He says enough for him to be taken away from you. She says no one's taking him away. Dylan says that girl is right now. Norma slaps him repeatedly. She says she hates him. He pins her to the door. We hear the doorbell ring. She goes and answers it. It's the police. Alex tells her she's under arrest for the murder of Keith Summers. We see a female officer arrest Norma, and she looks at Shelby. The camera zooms in on him. It goes back to Norma and goes to a black screen. So, yeah, I'd say pretty good episode. Not my favorite, to be honest, but I'd say it's still pretty good. Alright, I hope you guys liked my review of episode 4 of Bates Motel. Join me next time for episode 5 of Bates Motel.